English Campfire.
So, picture this highly stressful, but I think entirely relatable scenario. You've just landed in New York City for the very first time.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, right. You step off the plane, the cabin pressure is still like popping in your ears. You reach into your pocket to grab your phone to figure out your next move, and the screen is totally black.
Just completely dead.
Completely dead. It died somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean. You have no map, you have zero data, and you have absolutely no idea which way is up.
I mean, that is basically the modern traveler's ultimate nightmare.
Totally.
We've outsourced so much of our spatial awareness to our devices now. So experiencing that kind of instant total disconnection in one of the most chaotic, high-density environments on Earth, it induces absolute panic.
Exactly. And, in today's deep dive, we are unpacking this really fascinating firsthand account of a traveler who actually lived this exact scenario.
They really did.
Yeah, they navigated the sheer sensory overload of New York City completely unplugged. But we aren't just telling a survival story today. We're going to use their journey to, reverse engineer the hidden logic of the city itself.
Right, because we're looking at the underlying mechanisms, the environmental cues, and those unwritten social contracts that you actually need to understand to navigate any major metropolis.
Because underneath all that apparent chaos of a city like New York, there is a very strict underlying operating system.
Yeah.
And when your digital operating system fails, you are forced to plug into the physical one.
That's a great way to put it. So whether you are prepping for your own trip or, you're just intensely curious about how human beings adapt to urban jungles without a glowing screen to guide them, this deep dive is going to give you the inside track.
Right. So the story begins the literal second our traveler steps off the plane at John F. Kennedy International Airport, or JFK as everyone calls it, and immediately they just hit this wall of chaotic energy.
Well, the sensory overload at JFK is real.
It's intense. There are announcements in multiple languages, these massive crowds surging in literally every direction, and they have to find their way through the terminal, which, is just the massive physical building for arriving and departing flights.
And this is where the absence of a phone instantly changes the whole dynamic. Right. I mean, normally you just stare at a blue dot on your screen and blindly follow a line, right?
Yeah, totally guilty of that.
We all are. But without it, you are forced to engage with the physical wayfinding architecture of the airport. What's so fascinating here is how the physical space of an airport is engineered as this highly manipulative environment.
Manipulative? How so?
Well, it's meticulously designed to process massive crowds of people who are, let's face it, exhausted, stressed out, and often don't share a native tongue.
I was actually thinking about this while reading the notes, and it feels like airport signage is essentially a giant choose-your-own-adventure book.
Oh, I like that.
But the stakes are incredibly high. I mean, one wrong turn and you're delayed by hours. It feels like the architecture funnels you. You don't really make choices. The building makes them for you through these visual cues.
That is precisely how crowd control design works. The phrasing and the color coding on airport signs, they act as this universal structural language.
Right.
The terminal layout uses psychological funneling. It moves you from wide, overwhelming spaces into narrower, highly directed corridors. The signage strips away all the nuance and forces travelers into a structured flow toward baggage claim.
Which is where you have to find that spinning conveyor belt, the carousel, to grab your luggage. It's like an environmental text that you are literally forced to read.
Exactly. And as you move through that physical funnel, the language of the environment actually changes entirely. Once you escape the physical maze of baggage claim, you hit the psychological wall of customs.
Oh, man. Customs. The vibe shift is real.
It really is. The signage shifts from being directional to interrogative. The environment stops guiding you and starts questioning you.
Right, because you get hit with that critical question, do you have anything to declare?
Yes. Which refers to, food, large amounts of cash, restricted items. It represents the sudden shift from passive navigation to active, high-stakes legal compliance.
Yeah, it's a fascinating threshold because it is the official point where the rules of the new country apply. And your understanding of that specific terminology dictates whether you walk out the front door or get pulled into a secondary screening room.
Which nobody wants.
Definitely not. So our unplugged traveler, they clear that hurdle. They follow the wayfinding architecture out to the AirTrain shuttle.
Which is essentially an escape pod.
Basically, it's a vehicle running on a fixed loop, a regular schedule, just to get people out of the airport's controlled environment, and it deposits them at Jamaica Station.
Right. the main transit hub in Queens.
Exactly. And this is where the safety of the airport's structured flow abruptly ends, because now they have to face the subway.
The underground labyrinth.
Yeah.
And here is where their reliance on flawed analog memory really gets them into trouble.
So true. So picture this. The traveler is standing on this crowded, narrow platform, making sure they stay behind the yellow line, and they have this vague memory of a travel article telling them to, quote, take the E train into Manhattan.
The dangerous thing, memory without a map.
Very. So they pay the $2.90 for a MetroCard fare. And just to clarify for everyone, that's fare spelled F-A-R-E, the cost of transit, not F-A-I-R like a carnival.
Good distinction.
Thanks. So a train pulls up, the digital sign on the side clearly says E-train. The traveler thinks, great, my chariot awaits, and they jump on. Right. 10 minutes later, they realize the stops don't match where they thought they were going. They're hurtling in a completely wrong direction.
It is the quintessential mapless mistake. They treated the NYC subway like a European transit system, and they totally failed to account for the crucial distinction between uptown and downtown.
Okay, wait, I have to push back on this a little bit. I mean, calling it a mistake feels harsh.
You think so?
Yeah. If we look at systems in like London or Paris, you follow the line name and the final destination station, right? It's a node-based system. It's intuitive.
Right.
New York City seems to be the outlier here by relying on this abstract relative geography like uptown or downtown. Isn't the system itself fundamentally flawed and, well, counterintuitive for outsiders?
That is a brilliant point, actually. And you're hitting on the core friction of NYC transit. The system isn't flawed, but it is entirely dependent on the physical geography of the island of Manhattan.
Which tourists rarely grasp.
Exactly. The transit map you look at on the wall, it isn't physically accurate. It's a topological map designed for readability. But the actual trains are bound by the physical constraints of a long, narrow island.
So the letter of the train is essentially just the physical track it lives on.
Precisely. The letter E is the vein, but the direction uptown or downtown is the vector.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right. So uptown always means moving north, toward the wider top of the island, like Harlem or the Bronx. And downtown always means moving south, toward the narrow tip, down by the financial district in Wall Street.
So if you apply a node-based logic to a geographical system, you fail.
Completely. Our traveler was aiming for Times Square, which is in the middle of the city, but they boarded an uptown train. With every passing minute, the geography of the island meant they were moving exponentially further away from their target.
They got caught in the wrong flow of the circulatory system, and the blood literally pumped them to the completely wrong organ.
That's a very visceral way to put it, but yes.
So they realized they need to switch lines or transfer to fix this massive geographical trap. But again, no smartphone, no transit app to calculate the reroute.
Right.
Their only way out of this underground maze is human interaction.
Which honestly forces them into a situation that genuinely terrifies a lot of tourists. Approaching a stranger in New York City.
Yes. And this brings up a massive cultural stereotype. I mean, we constantly hear that New Yorkers are aggressive or rude, or they'll simply walk right over you if you stop moving.
You see that in movies all the time.
Exactly. But the story in our sources paints a completely different picture. The traveler approaches an older man on the platform, and the man is incredibly helpful.
Yeah, he really saves the day.
He does. It really made me wonder, is it possible that what tourists perceive as rude is actually just a culture of hyper-efficiency?
Oh, that is the exact mechanism at play here. Urban sociologists often talk about this concept of inattentive politeness.
Inattentive politeness.
Yeah. In a city of 8 million people living right on top of each other, the most polite thing you can actually do is give people their privacy and not impede their momentum.
Right, because everyone is always in a rush.
Exactly. The rhythm of the city demands efficiency. If you stop dead in the middle of a subway stairwell to unfold a massive paper map, you are breaking the flow of traffic, and that is a huge breach of the social contract.
You essentially become a physical obstacle.
Right, but if you ask for help in a way that respects that social contract and respects their time, locals are famously helpful. And our traveler actually executed this perfectly without even realizing it.
Let's look at the exact phrase they used because it's so telling. They walked up and said, "Excuse me, sorry to bother you. I'm trying to get to Times Square and I think I took the wrong train. Could you point me in the right direction?"
From a psychological standpoint, asking someone to point me in the right direction is a masterstroke in urban communication.
Because it lowers the stakes.
Because it dramatically reduces the cognitive load for the local. Think about it. If you say, tell me how to get to Times Square, you are implicitly demanding a complex step-by-step algorithm.
Which feels super burdensome to someone rushing to work.
Exactly. But asking them to point you in the right direction is just request for a vector.
Yeah.
It taps into human altruism without demanding a massive time commitment.
And notice how transactional the stranger's response is, too. The man replies, yeah, you need the downtown E, not the uptown. Grab it on the other platform, 2 flights down. It's perfect.
Right. There's no, where are you visiting from, or how is your day going? It's just pure, unfiltered data delivery. It really reframes what we consider polite.
It's efficient altruism. Direction, location, and boom, all delivered in 5 seconds without breaking stride.
So, armed with this highly efficient human-provided GPS, our travelers successfully transfers. They ride the downtown E and finally emerge from the underground labyrinth at Times Square.
But they aren't done yet.
Not even close. Their actual hotel is across town in the East Village. They are out of money on their MetroCard, and after that ordeal, they absolutely refuse to go back underground. So they decide to walk.
And this is the real pivot point of the whole experience, because by walking, they're forced to engage directly with the street-level fabric of the city. They have to decode the famous Manhattan grid.
Which, if you don't know the history of it, is actually fascinating. The grid wasn't an accident at all.
Not at all. We're talking about the Commissioner's Plan of 1811, where city planners literally steamrolled a mathematical matrix over the island. They didn't care about the natural topography, the hills, the streams, the natural paths.
They just wiped it all out.
Yeah, they laid down these intersecting horizontal and vertical lines to just maximize real estate efficiency.
It imposed this strict capitalist logic onto a chaotic physical space. So streets run east-west and avenues run north-south. And because the traveler doesn't have a phone dictating their route, they have to actively read this matrix.
And this brings up a huge difference in how we process space. I mean, if they had a working phone, they would have looked down at their hands the entire time, right? Just blindly following a blue line from point A to point B.
We all do it.
Yeah.
They don't even look up at the buildings.
Exactly. But because they are unplugged, they have to navigate using visual anchors. They literally have to look up. They start using landmarks like the Empire State Building and the Chrysler Building to orient themselves on this giant piece of graph paper.
Which fundamentally alters spatial memory. When you rely on turn-by-turn digital GPS, you shrink your entire cognitive map to a 3-inch screen.
Ah, yeah.
You outsource the mental heavy lifting, meaning you rarely retain the layout of a new place. But by looking up at landmarks and mathematically counting the blocks, like, okay, I need to go 3 blocks south and 2 avenues east, the traveler is actively writing the city's geography into their own brain.
They're building a mental model that won't disappear when the battery dies.
Exactly. And they are also dealing with the physical rhythm of the streets, navigating the dense traffic, reading the timing of the traffic lights, understanding how pedestrians behave in crosswalks.
Those striped pedestrian areas can be intense.
Oh, yeah. It's a totally different flow compared to the highly controlled airport environment we talked about earlier. The city traffic lights dictate an aggressive, pulsing rhythm that you just have to sync up with.
You really do. And as they walk, they understandably get a bit turned around. They wander off their intended path into a neighborhood called Clinton, which is historically known as Hell's Kitchen.
Right, moving away from the bright lights of Times Square.
Yeah, it's a denser, more residential area full of brownstones. And feeling lost again, they duck into a 24-hour deli to ask for directions.
Now, for anyone outside of New York, we should clarify that a deli isn't just a place to buy a turkey sandwich.
Right. The urban sociology of the New York deli is completely unique.
It really is. In a city where real estate is at an absolute premium, apartments are notoriously tiny. People don't have massive pantries or bulk storage like they do out in the suburbs.
So true, you can barely fit a cereal box in some of those kitchens.
Exactly. So the 24-hour corner deli effectively functions as the neighborhood's external pantry. It is an indispensable community anchor born directly out of high-density living.
And inside this deli, our traveler meets the owner, who is an Egyptian immigrant who has been running the shop for 2 decades. The owner listens to their story, grabs a brown paper bag, and literally draws them a map with a ballpoint pen.
That is amazing.
It is. The traveler buys a bottle of water, deeply grateful, and steps back out into the noise of the street.
You know, that entire interaction perfectly encapsulates the concept of the city's hustle.
How do you mean?
Well, we often use that word to describe the chaotic, relentless physical noise of the streets, right? The taxis, the sirens, the sheer volume of humanity moving at once.
Yeah.
But it also defines the socio-economic engine of the city.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, like an immigrant running a 24-hour business for 20 years, acting as a pillar of the community while simultaneously dealing with lost tourists. That's hustle.
It's the dual nature of the environment. The city is incredibly unforgiving, yet uniquely supportive if you know how to engage with it.
Perfectly said.
And that really brings us to the culmination of this whole ordeal. Our traveler finally arrives at their hotel in the East Village. They are almost an hour late. They are sweating. Their feet are blistered, but they are entirely triumphant.
They survived the initiation.
They really did. They walked 14 blocks in the wrong direction. They transferred subways twice. They navigated the grid, and they walked away with a hand-drawn map on a paper bag. Getting lost wasn't a disaster or a failure of logistics. It was a masterclass in urban resilience.
Because the mechanisms we've explored today, the psychological wayfinding of the terminal, the geographical logic of the subway, the transactional politeness required to ask a stranger for help, and the spatial awareness needed to read the grid, these aren't just vocabulary words.
No, not at all.
They are the actual tools of human connection and adaptability that you have to rely on when technology fails you.
It really makes you realize how deeply we insulate ourselves from the physical world. I mean, when our devices work perfectly, we are essentially walking around inside a customized digital bubble, completely isolated from the environment and the people around us.
We trade serendipity and environmental awareness for pure convenience.
We really do. Which leaves you with a pretty profound thought to chew on. As urban planners increasingly design the smart cities of the future, they are building infrastructure under the assumption that every single citizen has a glowing blue dot in their pocket. Or, an augmented reality map in their glasses.
Right. Assuming we'll always be connected.
Exactly. But if the physical environment no longer needs to be legible to the human eye, do we engineer out the need for human interaction entirely?
That is a chilling thought.
It is. If you never have to ask a stranger to point you in the right direction, will that kind of spontaneous, efficient altruism become a lost art? Or worse, will approaching a stranger on a subway platform eventually be viewed as a bizarre breach of the social contract?
You have to wonder what we're losing.
You do. It's definitely something to think about the next time you blindly follow your phone down a city street. Maybe, just maybe, try turning it off for an afternoon and see what kind of map you can draw for yourself.